Morning. My name is Mark Lois. I'm a trainer for Shear Supply. Couple logistics about today's class. We will work all the way through. We will not be taking a break during this morning's session. This session should last about an hour and 15 minutes, depending on the amount of questions and stuff. But we are going to work straight through it. If you do have questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A section and we'll address it during the presentation. We may wait till the end for it, but we'll be happy to answer all of your questions. This morning's class is on the new A2L equipment. Oh, excuse me. This is part 2 of the class. So part 2 is specifically what happens when you unpackage an American Standard system with the new R454 refrigerant. What are you going to see, and what are going to be some of your installation practices that will be different? That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, if you haven't done any of the earlier stuff on A2L, and that could have been through anybody, ESCO, ASHRAE, or anything like that. A lot of the refrigerant manufacturers have been doing training as well. I do have a YouTube video that's available that kind of talks about the refrigerant change and why it happened, the flammability of it, such like that. You can get that link for YouTube from your territory salesperson, or somebody at the branch can share that link with you if you wanted to watch it. It's about an hour long. It kind of talks about the transition, the flammability, the amount of energy that's required to have the stuff be flammable. That is available to you on YouTube. And again, there's a lot of other great sources out there that will teach you that as well. So today's class is specific to American Standard and the R454 changes. Now, we already do have a question in the Q&A, and they're asking about line sets. Can we still use 3/8 line sets? Yes, you can. And we'll talk about that during the presentation. There's actually a few slides on that and some resources that are available to you about confirming line set sizes, which I'll share with you as well. So our agenda for today is, first, we're going to talk about gas systems. Then we'll talk about residential package systems. This is just the Resi Pack. This has nothing to do with the commercial side of it. Then we'll talk about air handlers and some of the changes to the air handlers. And then we'll get into the condensers, air conditioners, and heat pumps. The lineup does change a little bit with the new refrigerant. Some of our line set information does change as well, but we'll talk about that in some great detail today. And then we'll actually introduce you to the mitigation board and some of the thinking of the board so you understand how it works. So let's get started with furnaces. Furnaces, we'll do the furnace itself and then the box coil. So for the furnace itself, this is actually the easiest part. This will be the, the fun part of the morning. Changes to the furnaces, nothing. Our furnace lineup is exactly the same as it's been for the last few years. Nothing for us has changed on the furnaces. Now, when I say nothing for us, I'm talking about American Standard. The furnace, the S8X, the S8B, the S8V furnace is exactly the same furnace you've been installing from us over the last handful of years. Nothing's changed on them. Now, what American Standard decided to do was to put the mitigation board on the box coil. Some of our competitors out there have actually added the mitigation board to their furnaces. So when you update a system with another brand, you would have to update all 3 components. You would need to update the furnace, because that's where the mitigation board is, the evaporator coil, and the condenser. For American Standard, by putting the mitigation board on the box coil, that allows you to install an American Standard condenser and coil on anybody's 24-volt furnace. So nothing for us changed on the furnace side. On the box coil, I know it looks a little bit different with that little contraption on the front, but we'll talk about that in detail in a little bit here. So for the coil and our nomenclature, we went from a 4 TXC coil to a 5 TXC coil. The 5 is indicating the new refrigerant. So the 4 TXC was R410. The 5 TXC is the R454 refrigerant. Now, physically, if I were to remove that contraption from the front, which is the mitigation control, the coiled construction is exactly the same. So it comes out just, it's the exact same coil you've been buying from us for over a bunch of years. The coil construction is exactly the same. The way that the TXV still connects to it with the threaded connections is still the same. The drain pan on the left side of the coil is just like it used to be. So if you're going horizontal left, it's already pre-set up for you. Now, if you're going to go horizontal right, you would have to move that pan to the right-hand side. That still is exactly the same. As a matter of fact, like I said, if I remove the mitigation board and the sensor, it literally is the exact same coil that you have been looking at for the last 5 years with us. So if we take off the front cover of the coil, the first thing you notice in the bottom right-hand picture is that sensor that's clipped onto the pan. Now that's just a finger clip. It's no fastening to it. It's just clipped over the side of the pan. That's our refrigerant sensor. That sensor is put in the bottom pan at American Standard's factory and is clipped into place before it even leaves the factory. So what American Standard has decided is that all of the sensor locations, when they're shipped from the factory, are going to be in the upright or upflow position. Now, if we're going horizontal left, if we're going horizontal right, or if we're doing changes to a counterflow or downflow system, we'll have to move that sensor as we convert that pan. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. But let's talk about the thinking of the mitigation system. So most brands that I've seen, and I've sat through a few different trainings, most brands that I see, they're doing it the same way. They're watching for a concentration of refrigerant in the drain pan of the evaporator coil. So refrigerant is only flammable if it gets to a certain air mixture. Most systems will not have enough refrigerant to make a flammable situation inside the home, because simply the square footage of the home and the amount of refrigerant in that system, we cannot get to a concentration where it would be flammable. But because the refrigerant is heavier than air, if we had an evaporator leak, we do have the possibility that if we pool enough refrigerant in the evaporator coil, that it actually can become flammable. That's why the manufacturer is watching for that mitigation or that detection of refrigerant in the evaporator pan. You're not going to find a sensor installed in the living space. The only sensor is going to be near the evaporator pan of that heating and cooling system. So if you're looking at that sensor, you can see that it's just clipped onto the pan. You can follow that black harness back to the connection, and then that wire harness leads to the mitigation board, which we just uncovered. So that's the mitigation board for the American Standard. Now, there's a couple of different mitigation boards depending on what system you're working, but how they look and how they act is exactly the same. So that is the mitigation board. Again, American Standard has made the choice to install that on the evaporator coil and not make it part of the indoor furnace. So we're going to be wiring to that. So if you look at that mitigation board, you'll actually see a harness on the left-hand side of it that comes in the top left corner of the box. And then there's a couple of pre-made plastic plugs that are on it. And those plugs are pre-made at the factory. So when you buy an evaporator coil, you're actually going to get a wire harness with the evaporator coil. That's going to be part of the shipment of the coil. The mitigation board is already pre-mounted to the face of the coil, and the sensor is already mounted to the pan in the upflow position. The other half of that harness is actually going to be labeled for you to tell you that this is your furnace connection, this is your thermostat connection, and this is the connection to your outdoor unit. Now, again, this cable will be shipped with the evaporator coil. And honestly, this is probably the most complicated one for the wiring. So once you kind of have a handle on this one, the rest of them will come a lot easier. That's why we started with the evaporator coil on a box system. Since we are installing the mitigation board on the box coil, that means it's not pre-wired to the indoor unit, right? You're going to have to wire it to the indoor unit. You're also going to have to wire it to the thermostat and you're going to have to wire it to the outdoor unit. So one end of the plug, right? This plugs into the board. There's actually two plugs on it. The plugs don't even look anything like each other. So there's only one place to put it. They only fit into one spot on the board. And then the other end of the harness, which you're looking at here, will have all your low voltage connections on it. Now, as you're looking at it, all of this is the same stuff that you would look at in the, on any low voltage wiring, right? A green wire, a yellow wire, a blue wire, a red wire. Those are all the same color designations that you would use on your typical low voltage wiring. Now, here's the way that I want you to think of it. Typically, when you guys do a gas system installation, the furnace generally becomes the landing spot for all of your low voltage controls. This mentality needs to change just a little bit. So instead of running your condenser back to your furnace and your thermostat wire back to the furnace, what I'd want you to do is think that the low voltage wiring now is going to have to land on the mitigation board itself. So if you can kind of picture in your mind that your thermostat wire is going to go back to the mitigation board, your condenser wires are going to go back to the mitigation board, and then you're going to run a short whip from your furnace control board up to your mitigation board. And the mitigation board now becomes the landing spot for all those low voltage wires. Now, I've been told, I haven't actually seen it, but I've been told that this wire harness is actually long enough that you can put it back inside the furnace cabinet. And that's fine and dandy. However your installation looks, that it works for you and that it cosmetically looks right, you're welcome to run that harness to wherever it trims out fine for you. But the idea that I want you to get into your head is that all of your low voltage connections are going to come back to the mitigation board. Let me jump into the Q&A. We had a question about the line set, which we'll address later. Do we need to reposition the sensor for horizontal install? Yes, we do. I'll show you that in just a second. Can the mitigation board be moved away from the coil to prevent condensation from causing damage? Yes, you can do that as well, and I'll point that out as well. So again, this will be the more complicated one for your low voltage wiring, because you're going to be wiring the indoor unit as well. All the other systems, the indoor units can be pre-wired for you. So all you're going to be hooking up is the thermostat and your outdoor condenser. But on this particular one, you are hooking up the indoor, the outdoor, and the thermostat. And the landing spot for all that low voltage connection will come back to the mitigation board on the box coil. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out, remember I told you that if you were to take the mitigation control off of the box coil, it's the same box coil that you've been used to forever. And matter of fact, for our larger capacity coils, the line set connections are still the same. 7/8 and 3/8 on the larger capacity, and 3/4 and 3/8 on the smaller capacity coils. Physically, these are exactly the same coils. They look exactly the same. They install exactly the same. So you ask yourself, why are you telling me about it if it's exactly the same? The reason why is this was already pointed out in one of our earlier Q&A or early question and answers, is the line set connections for the condensers have changed. On the condenser, the line set connection has changed, and I'll point that out later this morning. But on the indoor units, this is true to the box coil and the air handlers. Your brace connections are exactly the same as they have been for the last 5 or more years. Your connection is exactly the same. How it looks, how you connect to it is exactly the same. So, yes, the sensor is mounted in the upright position. And you can see in the picture on the screen that it's just clipped to the pan. So you're correct. If you're moving this system to a horizontal left application, now we don't have to change anything with the pan at that point, right? Because the coil pan is still on the left-hand side as a multi-position coil like we've always sold. The only difference is that you would actually unclip it from the bottom pan and move it to the pan on the left-hand side if you're going horizontal left. Now, if I'm going horizontal right, now, just like we always had to do before, we had to slide the coil out and move the pan to the right-hand side to go horizontal right. When we move it to the right-hand side, and then we have to put the clip of that sensor on the right-hand side. So what we want is that sensor to always to be in the bottom pan of that system. So the pan that would be catching the condensate, and this would be true even with our air handlers. If we're going horizontal left or right with our air handler, we want to make sure that that sensor is in that bottom pan. In this picture, they're showing you it being moved to that bottom pan. Now, I've had a question in one of the live classes where somebody had asked, if that pan is pitched, is it a specific spot for it? No. Any place that you can clip it to the bottom pan is a safe practice or a safe place to put that sensor. Somebody had also asked about, can that control board be removed from the front of the coil? Yes, it can. It doesn't even have to stay there. If you want to remove it for your installation so that when you're doing brazing on the line set connections, that you don't overheat the board, that's fine, absolutely. If you find that it's easier, maybe you're installing this on somebody else's furnace, which we can do. If you install this on somebody's furnace and the venting's in the way of where that control is, you can move that control to a different area. There is some wire that's available for the sensor, and the harness itself doesn't matter where you're going to do it, right? Because that's shipped loose with the system. You can actually move that control portion of it to anywhere you want. If it's easier on the side, if you want to put it on a rafter to the side of the system, you can move that control to that area of it. Now, with installations, a couple of things that are recommended from American Standard with this new refrigerant is one, is that when you're installing a new system, they want a leak test on that line set of 600 psi of nitrogen for 1 hour. Now, I know, my Q&A is going to blow up. Now, if you found a practice that works for you and that works fine, right? We're not going to send out American Standard Police to ask you to watch you put a 600 psi test on it. That 600 psi test is to make sure that the system isn't leaking in the line set and the evaporator coil. They also recommend that you pull the system to a 350 micron pull on it. Again, the whole idea of this is that you're actually making sure that you don't have any braze leaks in that system. FieldTechHelp.com does have a wiring video. Let's say it's a couple weeks or a couple months before you install your first gas system and you've forgotten what we've talked about. You can go to FieldTechHelp.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it has a 5-minute video that'll walk you through the low voltage wiring of the mitigation board. Now, again, all of your connections are exactly the same as they've been before, and they're even identified that if it's for the indoor unit or for the outdoor unit or such. And if you're wiring up an air handler, it's even easier because it's pre-wired to the air handler for you, so everything on the indoor is pre-done for you. On a gas system, you do have to wire in the indoor unit, the outdoor unit, and the thermostat, but you're using your typical low voltage connections. Let's jump into the Q&A for a section. So we'll be working with a thermostat to the whip and not the board on the furnace. That is correct. You want to keep in mind when you're doing low voltage wiring for a gas system, you're going to have to wire the furnace to the mitigation board. You're going to have to wire the thermostat to the mitigation board, and you're going to wire your outdoor condenser to the mitigation board. You'll still have a whip from the furnace going to the mitigation board, but those will just be your typical low voltage connections. Again, remember, our board on our furnace has not changed. It is exactly the same furnace that you've been working on before. So you're going to have your Y connection, your G connection, your transformer R and B. Whatever you were using before is still what's on that board. Going horizontal right is okay to connect flange to flange between the furnace and coil. Whatever installation practices that you've been using with our old system, it is exactly the same connection with this new box coil. Again, when I say it's a new box coil, it is literally the 4TXC coil, but with a R454 TXV on it and the mitigation control. Every practice that you did before with our old coil will do with the new coil in the way of mounting. Will the R454 TXV work with R410? Well, here's what I can tell you is it's not rated with it. So the factory does not want you to use it. Now, a lot of the operating pressures and temperatures of the refrigerants are very similar. So will somebody do it? Probably, but it is definitely not recommended. Is this process for the low voltage wiring compatible with communicating systems? So, Chris, if you looked at the control board when we were on that slide, there's actually a landing spot for link connection. So if you're doing link communicating systems, all of our control boards have the receptacle on it for your link wiring. You can use pro press fittings. Yes. Matter of fact, we'll talk about that later. Every manufacturer that I've seen is pro press fittings, or pro, and I mean pro, they're for it, press fittings. And matter of fact, you'll see that some of the stub connections for other brands and even for American Standard will go to a non-beld fitting that you can use pro press. Zone systems, if you're doing a link zoning, it wires in because it's still a link communicating. 24 volt, you're going to use the accessory terminals on the board, which I'll show you here in a little while. And those accessory wires will, you'll have to tie in a relay to open up zoning. So yes, you can use zoning. Does the outdoor condenser sensor require a whole new wire that needs to be ran to the mitigation board? There is no mitigation on the outdoor unit. Only place we're doing mitigation or sensing of refrigerant leak is only on the evaporator coil. I have not seen any manufacturer go back to or have any kind of mitigation system on the condenser. All right, we're going to get back to the presentation. ResiPack units. ResiPacks, model number wise, went from a 4-digit beginning to a 5-digit beginning. That is really the only physical difference you're going to see on the package units. Physically, the package units are exactly the same. Only thing they did is update the TXVs in it and add a mitigation system to it. Now, the mitigation is actually pre-wired into the package unit for you. So the only connection you're making on a package unit is you're connecting the thermostat wire to it. Right? The indoor portion of it, the condenser portion is already pre-wired in the unit. All you're doing is hooking up your thermostat control on the outdoor unit. There'll be a wire bundle there that you'll see that'll have a Y, a G, a W, or a white, a blue, and a red. All you're doing is hooking up those connections to the Resi package unit. All the other wiring is done for you internally to the unit. Physically, nothing has changed on the package units. The electric heater kits. Now, this is true on the Resi packs and the air handlers. The electric heater kits have been updated with a new model number for the heat kits on the Resi packs and the air handlers. Now, physically, when you look at the electric heat kit, it's exactly the same. As a matter of fact, how it installs, how it looks is exactly the same. The only component that they changed on the heater packs is that they encased the contact points on the contactor. So traditionally, if you look at a contactor, when the spring pulls in on that coil, you'll actually see the points come down and make contact with the contactor. This now has a cover on it, basically a black piece of plastic covering up the spring portion or the points of that contactor. So even if you had a TEM4 air handler that you installed 4 years ago, 6 months from now, you want a warranty heat kit for it, it'll replace the original electric heat kit with the new part number. It's backwards compatible. And really, it's physically the same physical dimensions. Everything, the way it plugs in, the way it does everything is exactly the same. The only difference you would notice is on that electric heat kit that there's a cover on the contactor. So this, you're going to see throughout the presentation some wiring diagrams. This is just to note the installer guide of where it is if you want to see it. But again, with the package system, it's super easy. Everything inside the package unit is already pre-wired for that package unit. All you're going to do is make your low voltage thermostat connection. And even your sensor location, right, doesn't change on a Resi pack because we don't change the evaporator pan. So it's already pre-installed in the right position for you. It's already pre-wired to the condenser and the air portion of that resi pack. All you need to do is hook up your low voltage connections from your thermostat. And that would be done to the same bundle and the same color designations that you've always seen. The air handlers. Our air handler lineup changed just a little bit. The TEM4 and TEM6, honestly, is exactly the same air handler as it always has been. They just added the mitigation board to it, they added the sensor, and they updated the TXV for the new refrigerant. Now, the model number for the TEM4 went to a 5 TEM4, so there's an extra digit in the new air handlers. The 5 at the beginning is just letting you know that that system is set up for the R454 refrigerant. The TEM6, same thing. It's the exact same air handler that you've been used to before. It's got the same airflow control board that you've always been used to. We just added a mitigation board to it and added a sensor to it. Now the TEM8 did change. The TEM8 was a 24 volt or CL2 air handler. This was a metal air handler for our old CL2 communicating systems, the ones that use the 850 and 1050 controls. That air handler is no longer available. And matter of fact, the condensers, when we get to it, are no longer available for that old CL2 communicating platform. The new condensers are only link available. Same thing with this metal air handler. This metal air handler is for 24 volt operation, or it's for link operation. So before, we only used to have the epoxy air handler, and now we've got a metal one that you can use for link operation as well. The epoxy air handler, the TAMX, now went to a 5 TAMX. We did go through a couple of design changes with that, which I actually think it makes it more serviceable, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Physical dimensions of the air handlers, width and depth are exactly the same. Width and depth of our air handlers have not changed. Some of the heights did change, but very fractionally. When I say fractionally, 1/4 of an inch here, 1/2 an inch there. So nothing that you would really notice unless you pulled out your tape measure. But the width and depth of all our air handlers are exactly the same. Now with the TEM4 going to the 5 TEM4, our TEM4 never had a control board in it. We used the 24 volt circuit from our thermostat to drive our indoor fan speed. So there was no control board on the old TEM4. The new 5 TEM4 does have a control board on it. The control board that's been added to it is only the mitigation board. It looks, matter of fact, very similar to the control board that you saw on the box coil. It is a different part number, and some of the logic that's built into it is a little bit different, but it looks and wires exactly the same. And matter of fact, the control board is pre-wired to the air handler for you. So all you're doing on your low voltage connection is hooking up your condenser and your thermostat to it. There's a bundle on there. You can see it in the drawing on the top right side of that drawing. You're just hooking up your low voltage bundle like you've always done before. How the electric heater installs, how it plugs in, is exactly the same as it was before. And again, with the sensor for the TEM4 and even the TEM6 and even the TEMC air handlers are all shipped in the upflow position. So if you're doing an upflow in a closet, let's say, you don't need to change anything. If you're going horizontal left or horizontal right, you're going to have to move it to that bottom pan. And even if you're going horizontal right, you still have to move the pan like you've always done with our systems before. So horizontal left is pretty easy. You take the cover off, unclip it from the pan, and move it to the bottom pan, which would be your left pan. If you're going horizontal right, you're going to have to slide the coil out, move the pan to the right-hand side, and then also move your sensor clip to the right-hand pan. This does not change on our box coil or any of our metal air handlers. So the picture on the left is you're actually seeing the TEM6 air handler with that clip moved to the horizontal pan in the left-hand configuration. Now on the right-hand side, I know it's kind of a busy picture. This is actually our new 5 TEMC air handler. So this is the metal air handler that now does link communicating. So when you're looking at it, it looks like a really busy picture, and it really kind of got me when the factory sent me this photograph. Because what you're seeing is on the top control board, that is our mitigation board. Right behind it is our airflow control board, or our link communicating board. Now, how am I going to service that, right? And that was my question to the factory. Well, what the factory did is mount that mitigation board onto a panel, which you can see protruding from the bottom of it. And that panel actually swivels out of the way like a door. So you can actually move the mitigation door or mitigation panel out of the way without disconnecting anything from this system to be able to diagnose that board behind it. So again, both boards now, right, we had to add an extra board to that electric heat section. So when we did that, they had to put that on a swivel door so that we can access both control boards without disconnecting anything. Tools wise, what do I need tools wise? Well, vacuum pump, right? When do you use a vacuum pump? Only when the system is completely void of refrigerant. So nothing really changes on your vacuum pump. The reclaimer does need to be a spark-proof, DC-driven, brushless motor. And you go, oh, now I got to buy a new reclaimer. Not necessarily. Most reclaimers that have been sold on the market for the last 5 to 7 years already are brushless DC and spark-proof motors. The refrigeration industry has been dealing with flammable refrigerants for over a decade. So most of the reclaimers, if you look on your reclaimer and it says that it's DC, it's brushless and or spark-proof, then you have a reclaimer that will already work for this refrigerant. Now, the new cans of refrigerant, this is only the new cans of refrigerant. So when you buy a new cylinder of refrigerant, it is backwards threaded. It's going to have a red stripe on it, a painted red stripe on the can, and it's going to be backwards threaded. So when you're buying your first can of refrigerant, please make sure that you have a way to adapt the new tank to your hoses. Now, Shearer Supply does sell like a 2-inch adapter that threads backwards onto the tank, and then your hose will adapt onto that. So the tank itself, and only the tank, has backwards threads on it, not the machine, or not the condenser itself, not your obviously reclaimer. That's the same one you've been using, not your gauges. That's all the same. Only the new can of refrigerant has a backwards thread on it. Now, the Department of Transportation does say that if you're reclaiming the new refrigerant, which you're supposed to do, that you do need a different cylinder for the slightly flammable or A2L refrigerants. Gauges wise, right? Gauges wise, if you have electronic gauges, you probably have a USB port on the gauges where you can update it with the new software. Now, ASHRAE, who kind of sets the rules and standards for heating and air conditioning, ASHRAE asks that you do have different gauges for each system that you're working on. If that's what you're going to do or not do, that's your choice. Now, if you're taking good care of your gauges and you're flushing them after each style of or system that you're working on, that's fine. But R454 uses POE oil just like it does in R410. So normal practices are probably going to be okay with this new refrigerant as well. R32 is a little bit different. R32 runs at higher pressures. And also, my understanding, you can confirm this with the other brands, but R32 is traditionally using PVE oil, which is a higher viscosity oil. So you may want to have different gauges for the R32 side of it. But again, confirm that with the other manufacturers. When we get into the 5TEM6, again, the physical dimensions of the depth and width of this air handler has not changed. Some of the heights have changed just slightly, but enough that you probably wouldn't even notice the difference. But the depth and width of the air handlers are exactly the same. As a matter of fact, how the air handler installs has not changed either. Everything about the installation of the air handler is exactly the same. If you're going horizontal right, you got to move the pan. Same idea. The only caveat is that you need to make sure that the sensor is in the bottom pan when you're done with your installation. Now, with our the TEM6, we've always had a fan control board on it. Well, we still have the fan control board on this 5TEM6 air handler. It's the exact same board that you've been used to forever, with the little micro switches to set up your airflow and your delays and such. That board is still mounted on that. We just added a mitigation board to it. Now the low voltage wiring is already done for you inside the air handler. Again, all you're connecting is your thermostat wire and your outdoor condenser wire. How the electric heat kit installs is exactly the same. Now it will be a different part number for the heat kit, but that is only because the breaker, or excuse me, the contactor inside that electric heat kit has changed. But how it installs, how it physically gets put in, how it gets wired in is exactly the same as what you've been used to for 10 years now. So when we added the mitigation board to the 5TEM6, right, we had to put it in a place that we still didn't lose any of our room for the electric heat kit. So they installed the mitigation board actually onto a hinged panel. So you can actually take a 5/16 screw out, open the door up for that mitigation, and still be able to set up your airflow control board without disconnecting or unplugging anything to be able to do that. If you look at the tray in the electric heat kit, that's our typical low voltage connection. Now this is a mock-up unit, so your factory one or your new one will look a little bit different, but everything's wires exactly the same as it has before. And again, I'm being redundant here, but when we're doing the TEM5, TEM6, or even the 5TEMC air handlers, we just got to make sure that sensor is in the bottom pan. And that pan change is exactly how it's been before with us. So it's already preset for horizontal left with the pan. I just got to move the sensor. If I'm going horizontal right, I got to move the pan and the sensor. The TEMC, this is actually the same dimensions as our old TEM8, but now we've changed the control board in it to handle the link communicating system. The 5TEMC air handler will not operate a CL2 system. So if you're doing a CEL2 system or you're doing a change out on the indoor unit, you're going to need to use a relay panel to convert it back to the old CL2 system. It is not pre-wired for our CL2. CL2 is any of our older communicating that use the 850 or 1050 control. This air handler is 24-volt operational, or it is link operational. Now this is the control board I showed you on the earlier one. So you can see in the top of the mitigation board, you have a landing spot for your link communication. So that has not changed. It's the same link plug that you've always been using that plugs into that mitigation board. And again, it's mounted over the top of the link board. And actually the board that's on the TEMC air handler, the 5TEMC air handler, is the exact same control board that's on the 5TAMX. So it's one combined board. Now, right, there'll be a stepper motor spot for it on the metal air handler, but it won't be used because the metal air handler is just using a regular TXV. So on the metal air handler for link now, it has a regular TXV in it. It doesn't have the stepper motor in it. So the operation of the TXV will be of a traditional TXV. Now you'll see on the coil that all the sensors have been added to it. So you get all the same data information that you would have gotten from the epoxy air handler, but it's not driving the stepper motor. But in the app or your dealer diagnostics section, you'll see all of the exact same information you would have saw from the epoxy air handler. So the TAMX air handler now went to a 5TAMX. So the TAMX air handler or 5TAMX air handler is for link operation only, or it is for 24-volt operation. It installs exactly like the old air handler did, except moving the sensors a little more complicated because it's attached to a bracket on this when you're going to need to move it. We'll talk about that in just a second. But if you're familiar with our legacy of epoxy air handlers, a couple of things that used to be service trouble points before, they've actually updated with the new air handler. So when they added the mitigation board to the TAMX air handler to make it the 5TAMX, there was no room in that drawer. There used to be a drawer in the top left corner that had my control boards for the epoxy air handlers. That drawer is no longer there. That drawer, all that controls now have been moved to the blower section. So that drawer that used to be in the top left corner of that air handler has been sealed up, and the control has been moved to the blower section. When they moved it to the blower section, UL asked them to put a metal panel behind the plastic panel. So when you open up the epoxy door, there's a metal door behind it. When they did that, they were able to remove the door switch. So when you remove that metal panel, if you go to the top right picture, you can see what it looks like inside of there. The first thing you see is the fan control board for that Tamex air handler. That's where your stepper motor plugs in. That's where all your sensors wire in. That's where your blower motor harness wires in. That is the first part you'll see. And if you want to access the mitigation board, you can see in the top right corner of that fan control board, and on the middle of the left-hand side, two 5/16 screws. If you remove those 5/16 screws, that hinge door will drop down, and on the back side of it will be your mitigation control board. So you can actually service both the boards without unplugging or disconnecting anything on the system. So when they went to the new 5 Tamex air handlers, they made a decision to update some of the serviceability of it. On the right-hand side, first thing you would notice if you've ever changed a coil on our epoxy air handlers, we used to have plastic baffles on it. Those plastic baffles have now been removed. They actually got metal cabinetry, galvanized metal that's attached to the coil for those baffles. So it makes it really easy. If you were to have to do a coil replacement in the future, you can just fasten it to the new one and make that transition a little easier. The other one was if you had to replace one of those sensors on the coil, you used to have to take off all the plastic components on the front of that coil to get the sensor past the pan. Well, they actually remolded the pan that there's now a channel way that if I have to change one of those sensors, it'll pull through that channel way that I don't have to take any of that plastic off the front. Now, as I had mentioned, the drain pan, or excuse me, the sensor for the refrigerant detection is actually mounted on a bracket in the upright position. So if you're going to go horizontal left or horizontal right with that coil or with that air handler, you're going to need to move the bracket and the sensor. It's no longer a finger clip on the epoxy air handler. You're going to need to follow the installation guide, which will show you how to convert it to the other direction. There's also a video on fieldtechhelp.com that'll walk you through that in a video process instead of the reading process. On the condensers, I'll tell you what, let me just pop into the Q&A for a second before I get into the condensers. Does the outdoor condenser sensor, oh, we talked about that. Do you recommend 7 PSI Pro Press fitting? I'm not going to specify a brand, neither does American Standard. But if you're using a press fitting that is approved for R454 refrigerant, that's all they care about, and that you follow their procedures on how to do it. Is the mitigation board in TX available to convert an R410 system to an R454? Let me be perfectly clear on this. American Standard says that none of their equipment is convertible. So if you want to convert an R410 coil to an R454, our American Standard says no. Even if you want to take an R454 coil and go backwards to an R410, American Standard says no. Is it physically capable? Right? Somebody's going to be creative and find a way to do it. It is physically the same coil. So if you change the TXV and you change the mitigation, will it physically work? Yes, but I'm going to tell you the policy of American Standard is nothing is convertible. If you call tech support and they know you've got an R410 coil on the inside and an R454 system on the outside, they will not offer technical assistance. Will somebody do it? Yes. American Standard says it is not convertible. What does American Standard recommend on situations where I installed the R410 air handler in 2024, but I need to change the condenser in 2025? American Standard's policy on that, Blake, is that you change the air handler. You cannot convert it. Next question. Can we use standard thermostat for all our units? Yes. American Standards, all of the entire lineup of residential product is approved with 18 gauge thermostat wire, solid core thermostat wire. You are making your connections exactly the same as you have in the past. We don't want 20 gauge. We don't want stranded. American Standard only recognizes 18 gauge solid core thermostat wire. Please continue to use that. Can you use the air handler for our 410 units? No. Again, you cannot convert the air handlers. What it is what it is. So if it was a 410 unit, it is still a 410 unit the rest of its life. If it's R454, it's R454 for the rest of its life. Will there be a sensor that can be bought for the condensers when the condenser is placed in the mechanical room? That is not being offered at this time by American Standard. You'll have to look at an outside brand. Anything that has to do, let's say that you have line sets running through a sealed room or something like that, and that area needs mitigation, you're going to have to look at an aftermarket brand to be able to do that. All right, let's get on to the condensers. So if you're looking at the old condenser numbers, they all start with a 4, right? That's talking and referring to our old refrigerant. The new model numbers on the condensers all start with a 5. So our 4A7A would be our 410 refrigerant, 5A7A would be a 454 refrigerant. Now, as I do the single stage 14 and 15s here, really not much on the condenser is actually changed. The physical dimensions, how everything is laid out inside that unit, there is no change. Matter of fact, there's no mitigation or anything on the outdoor unit. So physically, the single stage and on the 14 and 15s here look and install exactly the same, with one caveat, which I'll get to in just a second here. For American Standards, the 2-stage unloading compressor, so 2-stage single compressor with an unloader on it, is no longer available from American Standard. They are no longer supporting a 2-stage unloading compressor. What they've added is a 2-stage inverter-driven compressor. So we actually have a presentation tomorrow, just like today's, but tomorrow is on this new 17 SEER condenser. The 17 SEER condenser is a 24-volt operating condenser. So it takes all the same low voltage wirings that you would do with the old 2-stage unit. You'd have a Y1, a Y2, all of that same wiring that you would have for an unloading condenser will now be part of our inverter-driven system. It'll operate on 2 stages of capacity. Y1 will be 70% compressor speed. Y2 will be 100% capacity. Again, tomorrow we have this class specifically on this condenser. The 17 SEER link condenser is also no longer available. So the 17 SEER is no longer available in the new refrigerant. The 18 SEER inverter communicating system is still available, but they derated it to 75 speeds in heat pump, 70 speeds in cooling. The 20 SEER unit is still 750 speeds, and then 700 speeds in cooling, or in straight cooling, 750 in heat pump operation. Now, our line set information has changed, and that's what we'll get into in just a minute here. So American Standard and UL have figured that you guys do not read warning labels when you go to service a unit. I would recommend it, especially with all the changes going on to equipment, right? Take a minute to know what you're working on. If it's inverter driven, right, there's some safety procedures we need to follow there. And obviously, if it has the new refrigerant, there's some safety procedures we need to follow there as well. But what UL decided is that we needed to indicate on the service ports of that unit if it was the new A2L refrigerant. So American Standard has decided to use these little plastic discs. These are heavy plastic discs, so they won't deteriorate in the rain. Could you melt them? I imagine you could, but they'll pull off of the stem of the unit. So on a straight cool unit, you would only see these plastic caps on the outside service ports of the unit. If you're servicing a heat pump or installing a heat pump, you'll see them on the outside and you'll see them behind the access door on the inside, also to indicate that it has the new refrigerant. Now here's where it gets a little sticky and icky. The service ports on the residential condensers, every one from our single stage 14 all the way up to our 20 SEER inverter unit communicating, the liquid line service valve has gone to a 5/16 liquid line. And honestly, as far as I know in the industry, we're the only ones that did this. So the liquid line service valve is 5/16 liquid line. Now it does bell out to 3/8 finished. So you could butt up a 3/8 copper line to it and use a coupling. The only downside of that is the liquid line dryer that's being shipped with American Standard condensers is 5/16. Now I was told that the fitting on a 5/16 liquid line dryer, if you swedge the 3/8 a little bit, will fit over the outside of that fitting. I haven't done it, I couldn't answer that, but just know that the liquid line on every condenser from American Standard is 5/16. The suction side, the suction line has pretty much stayed the same on the single stage and the 24-volt inverter unit. The variable speed ones did change a little bit. We'll talk about that specifically in just a moment. Yes, you can still use a 3/8 liquid line. You'll see in the installation guide of the equipment that 3/8 is an approved size. So if you have an existing 3/8 liquid line, you still can use it. So one of the things that was already talked about in the Q&A is every manufacturer is going to a service connection or a line connection that they call as ProPress accessible. And really all that means is that the stem may be longer and that the bell will be removed. American Standard plans on going in that same direction. So they are going to have it. Now, if you don't want to use press fitting, that's fine. Brazing connections are still okay and still approved. But if you are using a refrigerant press fitting, you are able to use that on the coils, on the air handlers, and on the condensing units. Again, there'll be additional warning labels on anything that has refrigerant in it. So if you're talking about a box coil, an air handler, or a condenser, or even a package unit, they are going to have updated stickers on it to tell you that it has the new refrigerant in it, and it is slightly flammable. On the condensing units, there also will be a label additional to the outdoor unit that'll ask you to add your charge to it. So on that label, you're going to add the data plate charge. What did the factory pre-charge that unit with? Then you would write in the spot below it, what did you add to it? Right? Because it's only pre-charged for 15-foot of line set. If you've added refrigerant to it, you will add it in that second line, give the total underneath, and then your dealer name and phone number. Now on a package unit, right, you don't have to do that because we're not adding any refrigerant to a package unit. So this will only be on the split system condensers. So earlier I had mentioned that American Standard recommends a 600 PSI test on when you're installing a new system. That would be on the evaporator and the line set or your copper tubing connection. Now, American Standard also says in the installation and service guide of that unit that they do not want 600 PSI in the condenser. So if you're making a service repair on the condenser or you've removed all the refrigerant from that system and you're going to do a leak test on the entire system, including the condenser, their maximum PSI test that they want on the condenser is 450 PSI. And that's not because of they're worried about the coil on it. This is only because of the compressor. They don't want you putting 600 PSI into a scroll compressor because you have the chance of separating the scroll plates and causing damage on the scroll plates. So if you're doing just the evaporator coil and line set, the recommendation is 600 PSI. If you're doing any part of the system that includes the condenser, you're only supposed to do 450 PSI. And again, that's noted in the installation guide and the service facts. This has always been the case or has been for quite a while for American Standard. They want you to open up the suction line first when you're starting up a new system. That's to allow the refrigerant out of the head of the compressor and to make sure that we don't have liquid refrigerant in that compressor when it tries to start up. So you open up the suction valve first and then the liquid valve second. Line sets on your single stage products, so your 14 and 15 SEER, or even our 24-volt inverter system, those line set information has not changed. 150-foot max is still the max of total line set. 50-foot of vertical change is still the maximum vertical change. So all the practices that you have followed for years on our single stage and that 24-volt inverter product are still good today. If you're servicing a condo association that has 40-foot of rise going up to a roof of that place, you're still fine with our single stage and 24-volt inverter stuff. Our variable speed product is not the same, and that's not because of the refrigerant. Our variable speed products, our 18 and 20 SEER units, now have shorter and sometimes smaller line sets than they did in the past. And that is because we made a compressor change on the unit. So you can look at this and take pictures or whatever you want, but here's the deal. Everything for our 18 and 20 SEER, what you know, has changed. And that's because we went to a rotary compressors on our unit. Danfoss, which was our old drive, which is that big aluminum drive, and the compressors in our 18 to 20 SEER units, which were also Danfoss, that business has gone away. Danfoss has ended their contract with American Standard. So we have gone to rotary compressors on all of our 18 SEERs and then rotary compressors on half of our 20 SEER units. The other half of the 20 SEER is using a traditional scroll compressor. So line set sizes have changed. You're going to need to reference the install guide if you have it on these units. As a matter of fact, if you're looking at the 2-ton unit in the top left-hand corner, the rated size is 1/2-inch vapor and 5/16 liquid. Can you use 3/8? Yes. Well, in fact, it doesn't even change your line set parameters. Can I use 5/8? Yes. But do you see 3/4 inches available on the 2-ton? No. And even when you go to the 3-ton unit, that's 5/8 and 5/16 is the rated size. I can use 3/4 inch on the 3-ton, but I cannot use 7/8. The installation guides will walk you through all of that. But you're going to ask yourself, well, what if I don't have the installation guide with me? I'm hoping everybody on this call is an American Standard dealer. If you are an American Standard dealer, you have access to AS DealerNet. That's American Standard's website for our contractors. On that website, there's a box at the top that offers tech support. And when you click on tech support, the first thing that's going to pop up is a refrigerant piping program. This works very similar to a simple manual J system. You go into the installation section, right? You can load the job name and job address if you want to print out a report when you're done. But if you go right to installation, you can actually input what system you're installing, what SEER rating, what's the actual model number. And this is actually active for our old R410 systems as well. This has actually been on their website for probably the last 6 or 7 months. Then you go to the installation information. Where's the unit? Is it above or below or on the same plane as your system? What's your line set length? What's your vertical change? How many elbows? And you hit calculate. Once you hit calculate, it's going to give you a recommended pipe size, right? That's great for new construction or if you have the ability to change the line set. You'll probably see that the line set size is probably smaller than what you would have guessed, and then you can save some money on the copper side of it. But let's say that you have a system that does not, you can't change the line set. So you go over to the option 2 sizing, and you can see the drop down box by liquid and vapor. If you use those drop down boxes, it'll tell you what line sets you can use. Now, if it's not in the drop box, means you can't use it. Pretty simple, right? If it's not in there, it's not an option. But I can select the drop box, see if my line set size is in there, select those 2 line sets, are the two copper sizes, and it's going to tell me actually what my BTU loss would be if I were to use that line set. So this is available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if you don't have your installation guide with you. All right, let's get into the mitigation board. But before I do, let me hop into the Q&A. When are the 3-ton, 18-inch wide cabinets coming out? I would say talk to your territory manager. The equipment rollout, I don't get involved in. Why change 5/16 if it's okay to use 3/8? American Standard has not told us why they did that. This is my assumption. This is only my assumption, is they went to the 5/16 because it's going to hold less refrigerant and holds less liability for them as the manufacturer if there is a thermal event. That's the only reason I can think of. That is true. The manufacturer did not make a 2.5 ton or 3.5 ton miles, only 2, 3, 4, 5 on the, yes. So on the 2-stage product and all the variable speed product, it is only solid sizes. So no half sizes on the 24 volt inverter or on the variable speed communicating systems. All right, so let's get into the mitigation board. On the mitigation board, if we start in the top right-hand corner of the mitigation board, now both boards are going to look very similar and operate the same way as far as you're going to be concerned. So that set of contacts, those spade terminals, it says accessories 1 and 2, closed dry contacts. So let's go into a couple of definitions first. The dry contact means that this is a dry spot for low voltage or line voltage. There is no output voltage on a dry contact. How I want you to picture it is if you went to Home Depot and bought a light switch for your wall at home, when you buy that light switch from Home Depot, does it have any power that comes out of it? No, right? You got to go home and put 120 volts into it to get 120 volts out of it. That's what a dry contact is. Now on this specific one, it says closed dry contact. So that means when this board is in normal operation, your mitigation board, when it's in normal operation, those contacts are closed. So in this example, if I was powering a REME Halo LED, I'd have 24 volts into one of those spade terminals and then 24 volts when I'm in normal operation to go out to my REME Halo LED. That's what would power it. Now, if the board goes into mitigation, it's going to open that contact and turn off any accessories. Why would you want to turn off those accessories? Because if that accessory is not approved for A2L refrigerant, you're going to need to turn off of that accessory anytime that system were to go into mitigation. So you have 2 sets of contacts that you can power different things as accessories for the system. That could be a humidifier, that could be an air cleaner. This could also be your zoning. Now, somebody asked about zoning. If I have zoning on that system, when I go into mitigation, I need to make sure that those zone dampers open so that I can mitigate that refrigerant through a wide open duct system. So what you'd have to do is use a relay to make sure that those dampers opened when you go into mitigation. Now, if we continue around the board to the right-hand side, there's actually 2 receptacles for A2L sensors. Only one is being used by American Standard. Only one is powered by American Standard. So you're not using the second receptacle at all. It is for some future uses, but it is not active today. So with that sensor, it's pre-wired on whatever piece of equipment, the sensor's in the right plug for you. Now, let's say you want disconnected it for some reason, and you want to make sure that you put it back into the right plug. If you were to plug it into the wrong spot and power the board up, it's actually going to tell you that it doesn't see the sensor. Just move it to the other receptacle. Only one sensor receptacle is available at this time. Now, if you work your way around to the bottom right corner, you'll see alarm open dry contacts. If that homeowner or that small business wants to monitor that system for mitigation with their alarm contractor, here's a point that they can do that. Now, that's an open dry contact as well, meaning that when it's in normal mode, that contact is open. When it goes into mitigation, it would close. And that would be for an alarm contractor if you wanted to monitor that system. Working our way across the bottom now, the first thing you see on the right-hand side is the common status LEDs. This board does 24-volt operation, or it does link operation, depending on how you wire it. The communication LED will only come on if you've got a link wired up in link operation. The status LED will give you a 1 flash, 2 flash, 3 flash, 4 flash, solid on, a slow pulse, depending on what mode of operation it's in. And I'll show you that in just a second. The next to the side of it is the test pins. So you've wired up a new box coil on a gas system and you want to make sure that everything works the way that it's supposed to. You can actually jump out those pins with your screwdriver and force it into mitigation. Also, the board does have the ability to hold a fault in history. So let's say that it went into mitigation and the homeowner didn't even notice it. They weren't home, or it happened so fast that they didn't even notice it went into mitigation. You come back in the fall for your tune-up and you look at the board and you see there's a fault in history. You can actually do a leak detection on that system to see if it does have a leak or anything you need to address. If not, those same test pins will clear that fault history for you as well. As you move around the board to the left-hand side, there's two different styles of plugs there. This is the plugs where that wire harness on that coil harness that comes with the box coil comes with it. You can see they look nothing the same. And the purpose was to make sure that you didn't plug them into the wrong spot. So the square plug 3x2 is the receptacle for the outdoor unit and the thermostat. The plug just above it, where the pins are in an order, are for your indoor connection to the indoor unit. Coming around to the top hand side, that is my link communicating receptacles. So if I'm using that box coil on a link communicating system, I have to plug into this, into my Modbus, and it will see and operate that system off of that, that communicating platform. In link communicating mode, the status LED will not tell you anything, but if it goes into fault, it'll actually show you a fault code to tell you that it went into mitigation, or if it has a failed sensor, if it has a failed board, it will actually communicate a fault code to you to let you know that. Now, this is part of the installation guide and the service facts of all of the units that have mitigation boards in them. This is walking you through of how it works and how it thinks. If you ever notice the QR code to the right-hand side in any of our installation or service facts, that QR code will actually take you to a video on fieldtechhelp.com that'll help you walk through the diagnosing of it. Now, I can tell you these QR codes have been utilized in our service facts for about 8 or 10 years now. So even if you're working on an old TAM7 and you see that QR code will take you to a video that will help you diagnose that system. So that's what the QR codes are for. This is just a screenshot of what the LEDs will do under different application. This is part of your installation guide and part of your service facts on each unit that has anything to do with mitigation. And there's also a video on fieldtechhelp.com that will walk you through the diagnosing of the mitigation board. You can access that video 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Fieldtechhelp.com is a website that Training American Standard put out over 10 years ago with tech support videos. There's 250 to 300 tech support videos available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on all of American Standard and Train's residential systems. Little touch on Ameristar. This has mostly been on American Standard. Ameristar, a lot of it doesn't change except for a couple things which we're going to point out here. One is on the Ameristar condensers. You're going to notice when you unbox the Ameristar condenser, right by the service ports of the unit, there's two stems that stick up from the liquid line and from the suction line. They look kind of silly, and I apologize, but this is where American Standard is charging this unit at the factory. That's what those stems are for. Those same stems are actually on American Standard unit, but they're in the side access panel. So if you were to take the side access panel off on American Standard, you'd see these two same stems. On Ameristar, they're fastened panels, so you don't remove them. It's So they had to put them by the line set connections. So these stems are for when they fill the system with a refrigerant at the factory. The box coil from Ameristar is a sourced product, which means American Standard buys it from somebody else. When they buy this box coil, the mitigation board is actually shipped loose. The mitigation board is inside the box for the coil. You don't have to buy it as a separate piece, but it is shipped not connected to the box coil. You can mount that mitigation board on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, or the face of the coil. There's actually dimples in the unit you can line it up with and use your drive screws to fasten it to the cabinet. It wires very similar to, it is a different board, and it wires very similar to the way that the American Standard board wires. You're wiring it to the outdoor unit, to the furnace, and to the thermostat. That's what I've got. Let me jump into the Q&A. Is a float switch wired in series with the red 24 volt? Adam, you can wire the float switch however you have in the past. If you're cutting red going to the thermostat, you can still do that today. If you're cutting Y to the condenser only, you can do that in the same place. That doesn't change. If you repair a leak on the condenser, line set, or evaporator coil, what is the procedure to fix the leak or sweat the pipe? Everything for service-wise is exactly the same, with the addition of 2 extra steps. So if you're servicing R454 refrigerant, meaning that you're opening a system that's already been being used, there's 2 additional steps that you would need. One is you still reclaim the refrigerant as you always have. Even though this is earth-friendly refrigerant, you are still required to reclaim it. Once you've reclaimed the refrigerant, the first step that you're going to add is you're going to purge the system for 2 minutes with nitrogen. This is to dislodge any refrigerant that's sitting in the oil pocket and push it out of the system. The next part you would add is you no longer are going to unbraze a connection. So for example, if you're doing a compressor change on the new refrigerant, you're not going to unbraze it. You're going to cut that compressor loose with a tubing cutter. So you're not unbrazing anything. If it's a threaded connection, you're fine. But if you're going to unbraze it, you're now going to do that with a tubing cutter. Those are the only 2 components on service that will change. Did you state that the mitigation board was provided with the Ameristar box coil? Yes, that's a good question. And the reason why I say it's a good question is, yes, it is supposed to be shipped with the box coil. Now, I've heard of reports out in the field through tech support that some of them have been shipped without it. You're going to need to contact the branch and let them know, and they'll have to pull it and get you one. But it is shipped with the box coil. Is the safety switch reusable? Does it need to be changed once it detects R454? The sensor is reusable. So if it senses refrigerant, it'll actually watch the molecule drop below that operating point and will reset on its own. And same thing with the control board. If the system goes into mitigation, it's going to turn off the compressor and turn the fan on for a couple of minutes to remove that refrigerant out of the box coil or out of the evaporator in that system. Once it sees that refrigeration level drop, it's going to go back to normal operation after a 5-minute delay. The 5-minute delay is just to keep the compressor from short cycling. The board and the sensor are designed never to lock out. Now, can a sensor fail? Sure. Can a board fail? Sure. But the idea is, even if this were to go into detection 25 times or 10 times or 5 times, it will never go into a permanent lockout. It'll go back to normal operation once the refrigerant is cleared with the indoor fan running. Once that indoor fan turns on, it's only going to take a minute or 2 to dissipate that refrigerant leak. Even if it's a catastrophic leak, it's going to move that refrigerant out of that area pretty quickly. So what it's going to do is go back to normal operation. Now, the mitigation board doesn't know if that system is off on low pressure. So if you've lost enough refrigerant that the low pressure switch keeps it from running, the mitigation board will not know that. As far as the mitigation board is concerned, it's going to go back to normal operation. If I have a brand new 410 coil, can it be changed over to R454? No. American Standard does not sell a conversion kit, and no, it does not offer or want you guys to convert them. Is it bad practice to use mitigation sensor to leak search for an evaporator coil? I would say so, but so that sensor is only going to have about a 5-foot whip on it, so you're not going to go very, very far with that sensor to be able to leak. I would use your leak detection or bubble, whatever you're doing today, to look for that leak. I'll give you a couple more minutes to throw anything in the Q&A, but that's all I've got today. And again, we have this class tomorrow morning at the same time. You do need to register for it to get the link for it. But we have a class tomorrow specifically on the 17 SEER 2-stage unit that's being introduced from the factory very shortly. So that's all I got. Have a safe day. And thank you for being partners with Share Supply, and have an awesome day. Can we use leak stop on R454? American Standard does not want leak stop in any of their systems, so I would say no.